History is often a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of human nature. While some events inspire us, others may deeply disturb us. This video shed light on events that have shaped our world in ways that can both fascinate and horrify, inviting us to reflect on the complex and often chilling nature of our shared past. Number 1. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria on June 28, 1914, is not only a disturbing event in itself, but also one that triggered a chain reaction leading to World War I, a conflict that would forever change the course of history. Archduke Ferdinand was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne and was targeted by a group of Serbian nationalists known as the Black Hand. The primary motive was to break off Austria-Hungary's South Slav provinces so they could be combined into a Greater Serbia or a Yugoslavia. On that fateful day, Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, were touring Sarajevo when a member of the Black Hand, Nedeljko Kabrinović, threw a grenade at their car. The grenade missed, but later in the day, a 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, another member of the Black Hand, managed to shoot the Archduke and his wife at point-blank range. The killings themselves were brutal and shocking, but the ramifications were far more extensive. Austria-Hungary's reaction to the assassination led to a series of political maneuverings, alliances, and treaties being invoked among the major European powers. Within weeks, the world found itself plunged into a global conflict. The assassination exposed the fragile political situation in Europe, where a tangled web of alliances and rivalries had created a powder keg ready to explode. The murder of Archduke Ferdinand was the spark that lit the fuse. The tragedy of this event is multi-layered. There's the personal tragedy of a couple out in public cut down in their prime. Then there's the greater tragedy of how this single event could set off a chain reaction that led to the deaths of millions. World War I led to significant changes in national boundaries, the downfall of empires, and a new political landscape in Europe. It also set the stage for World War II and altered the course of history in ways that are still felt today. Number 2. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study is one of the most infamous episodes in the history of medical ethics. Conducted between 1932 and 1972 by the U.S. Public Health Service, the study aimed to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis in African American men in Macon County, Alabama. The disturbing aspect of the study was not only the subject matter, but the method in which it was conducted. The 600 participants, 399 with syphilis and 201 without, were misled and not informed about the true nature of the study. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, a local term used to describe various ailments. In exchange for participating, the men received free meals, medical exams, and burial insurance, but they were never informed that they had syphilis or that the purpose of the study was to observe the untreated course of the disease. Even when penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis in 1947, researchers did not offer it to the participants or even inform them of its availability. The study continued for several more decades, during which many men died of syphilis, while others suffered severe health problems or passed the disease on to their spouses and children. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study was eventually exposed in 1972 by a whistleblower, and the public outcry led to its termination. It became a symbol of racial injustice and medical malfeasance, highlighting a disturbing lack of ethics in medical research. The legacy of the Tuskegee Syphilis Study has had far-reaching effects. It has bred mistrust in medical institutions, especially among African American communities. This mistrust has had tangible repercussions, such as reluctance to participate in medical research or even to seek medical treatment. The study also prompted major changes in U.S. law and ethical standards concerning human participation in medical research. The National Research Act of 1974 led to the establishment of Institutional Review Boards, IRBs, to review and approve research involving human subjects, ensuring that the rights and welfare of participants are protected. Number 3. The Salem Witch Trials. The Salem witch trials represent a dark and troubling period in American history. Occurring in 1692 in the Puritan settlement of Salem, Massachusetts, these trials resulted in the execution of 20 individuals, 14 of them women, and the imprisonment of several others. The panic began when a group of young girls exhibited strange behaviors, including convulsions, contortions, and unexplained outbursts. The local doctor diagnosed the girls as being under a witch's spell, and soon, the community was consumed by a frenzy of fear and suspicion. Accusations of witchcraft spread like wildfire. Neighbor accused neighbor, and personal grievances were often disguised as concerns about witchcraft. Those accused were brought to trial where evidence was flimsy at best. The most damning accusations often came from so-called spectral evidence, where accusers claimed to see the specter of the accused performing witchcraft. This form of evidence was subjective and unverifiable, but was accepted by the courts of the time. The trials were riddled with irrational fears and mass hysteria. Confessions were often extracted through intimidation and the promise of leniency. Some of those accused confessed to witchcraft, hoping to save themselves, while others maintained their innocence to the end. The trials were not merely an isolated incident, but were reflective of broader societal tensions. The residents of Salem were living in a time of political uncertainty, economic hardship, and fear of Native American attacks. These underlying anxieties likely contributed to the witchcraft hysteria. As quickly as the hysteria began, it ended. By October 1692, Governor William Phips, alarmed at the number of people imprisoned and the impact on the community, ordered an end to the trials. Spectral evidence was declared inadmissible, and many of those imprisoned were released. The Salem witch trials left a scar on the American consciousness and have become a symbol of injustice, fear, and irrationality. They serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mass hysteria, the importance of due process, and the need for rational and fair legal proceedings. The aftermath of the trials led to a wave of remorse and reflection. Many involved publicly confessed their mistakes, and compensation was provided to the families of the victims. Yet the damage had been done, and the memory of Salem continues to be a disturbing reminder of how fear and ignorance can lead to tragic consequences. Number 4. The tragedy of the Titanic. The sinking of the RMS Titanic on April 15, 1912, stands as one of the most infamous maritime disasters in history, a symbol of human ambition, technological achievement, and ultimately tragic hubris. The story of the Titanic continues to captivate and disturb over a century later. The Titanic was heralded as the largest and most luxurious passenger ship of its time. Built by the White Star Line, it was designed with the latest technology and boasted unparalleled opulence. Many believed it to be unsinkable, a notion that contributed to the calamity that would unfold. On its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York City, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. Despite having been warned of ice in the area, the ship was traveling at near full speed. The collision caused the hull to breach, and water began flooding into the ship's compartments. What followed was a series of tragic missteps and failures. Of the 20 lifeboats on board, only enough to accommodate about half of the passengers and crew, several were launched partially filled. A lack of clear instructions and a failure to properly organize the evacuation contributed to the chaos. As the ship began to sink, panic set in. Women and children were prioritized, leaving many men, including those in the lower classes, with little chance of survival. Heartbreaking accounts of families separated and acts of bravery and sacrifice emerged from the survivors. Within 3 hours, the Titanic was fully submerged. Of the 2,224 passengers and crew on board, more than 1,500 lost their lives. The Carpathia, a nearby ship, arrived to rescue the survivors, but for many, it was too late. The sinking of the Titanic exposed glaring deficiencies in maritime safety regulations. The lack of sufficient lifeboats, inadequate training of crew, and failures in communication all came under scrutiny. The disaster led to significant reforms, including the establishment of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, which continues to govern maritime safety today. Number 5. The Massacre of Nanking. The Massacre of Nanking, also known as the Rape of Nanking, is one of the most shocking and brutal episodes in the history of warfare. Occurring during the Sino-Japanese War, this 6-week period from December 1937 to January 1938 saw the Japanese Imperial Army capture the city of Nanking, now Nanjing, where they embarked on a spree of violence and looting. An estimated 300,000 Chinese soldiers and civilians were killed, and tens of thousands of women were sexually assaulted. The violence was indiscriminate, targeting people of all ages and social classes. Mass executions, forced marches, and other forms of extreme brutality were widespread. The motivations for the atrocities are complex and remain a subject of historical debate. Some argue that the violence was a strategy to intimidate the Chinese population, while others believe it was a result of a breakdown in discipline among Japanese troops. The massacre of Nanking remains a deeply painful and contentious issue in Sino-Japanese relations. Efforts to deny or downplay the events by some Japanese nationalists have led to outrage and protests. The tragedy continues to influence perceptions and relationships in East Asia and stands as a horrifying testament to human cruelty during wartime. Number 5. The Chernobyl disaster. The Chernobyl disaster, which occurred on April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, is the worst nuclear accident in history. An explosion and fire released large quantities of radioactive particles into the atmosphere, spreading over western USSR and Europe. The disaster began during a late-night safety test at reactor number 4, which went horribly wrong. A sudden drop in reactor power, followed by an attempt to correct it, led to an uncontrollable reaction. The resulting steam explosion and fires released radioactive isotopes, leading to widespread contamination. The immediate aftermath saw 2 plant workers die, but the longer-term effects have been far more extensive. Thousands of emergency workers exposed to high levels of radiation suffered health issues, with many dying in the years that followed. The broader population has experienced increased rates of cancer and other health problems. The response to the disaster was plagued by delays, misinformation, and inadequate safety precautions, exacerbating the crisis. Hundreds of thousands of people were eventually evacuated from the affected areas, leaving behind ghost towns. The Chernobyl disaster has had lasting environmental, social, and political impacts. The area around the plant remains largely uninhabitable, and the disaster prompted a re-evaluation of nuclear safety and policies worldwide. Number 6. The forced relocations of Native Americans. The forced relocations of Native Americans during the 19th century, commonly referred to as the Trail of Tears, stand as a dark chapter in American history. This series of forced removals orchestrated by the U.S. government led to the displacement of tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands. The policy, aimed at making way for white settlers, began with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson. The Cherokee Nation was particularly affected, being forced to relocate from their homelands in the southeastern United States to designated Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. The journey was fraught with hardship, suffering, and death. Families were torn apart and communities were shattered. Thousands died from exposure, disease, and starvation along the way. The brutal conditions of the removal and the profound loss of culture, community, and autonomy left deep scars that continue to resonate. The forced relocations of Native Americans serve as a disturbing example of the dispossession, dehumanization, and marginalization faced by indigenous peoples in the face of expanding European American settlement. The legacy of this tragedy continues to affect Native American communities and remains a poignant reminder of the injustices they have endured. Number 7. The Stanford Prison Experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted by psychologist Philip Zimbardo in 1971, is one of the most notorious studies in the field of psychology. Intended to investigate the psychological effects of perceived power and authority within a simulated prison environment, the experiment quickly spiraled out of control. Volunteer participants were randomly assigned roles as either guards or prisoners. The guards were given authority over the prisoners and were instructed to maintain order. Almost immediately, the guards began to display abusive behavior, humiliating and degrading the prisoners. The prisoners, in turn, became passive and distressed. The experiment, initially planned to last 2 weeks, was terminated after just 6 days due to the alarming psychological effects on the participants. The guards' behavior had become increasingly sadistic, and the prisoners showed signs of extreme stress and emotional trauma. The Stanford prison experiment has been criticized for its ethical lapses, including the lack of intervention by the researchers as the situation escalated. It has also been questioned for its methodology and the potential influence of Zimbardo himself on the participants' behavior. Number 8. The fall of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, marked a turning point in history, symbolizing the end of the Cold War and the beginning of a new era of openness and reconciliation. Constructed in 1961, the wall physically and ideologically separated East and West Berlin, standing as a stark symbol of the division between the Communist East and the Democratic West. For 28 years, the wall not only divided a city, but also families, friends, and an entire nation. Attempts to cross were fraught with danger, and many lost their lives in the pursuit of freedom. The wall became a global emblem of oppression, confinement, and the human cost of political ideology. The fall of the wall was precipitated by a series of political changes and popular uprisings in Eastern Europe. Confusion over travel regulations led to a sudden announcement that the border would be opened, sparking jubilation and a mass movement of people. Images of joyful Berliners tearing down the wall with hammers and chisels captured the world's attention. The event set the stage for the reunification of Germany and the collapse of the Soviet Union. While celebrated as a triumph of the human spirit and the desire for freedom, the fall of the Berlin Wall also unearthed challenges and painful memories. The transition to reunification was complex and often fraught with social and economic difficulties. The fall of the Berlin Wall remains a significant moment in history, reflecting the power of human agency, the fragility of oppressive regimes, and the enduring desire for freedom and connection. Number 9. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, marked the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. The bombings were ordered by the United States during the final stages of World War II with the aim of forcing Japan's unconditional surrender. The bombings resulted in the immediate deaths of over 100,000 people, with tens of thousands more succumbing to injuries and radiation-related illnesses in the years that followed. The devastation was unparalleled, reducing both cities to rubble and leaving a legacy of human suffering and environmental damage. The decision to use atomic bombs remains one of the most controversial and debated actions in military history. Supporters argue that the bombings hastened the end of the war and saved lives by preventing a prolonged invasion of Japan. Critics contend that the use of such devastating weapons was unnecessary and immoral. The aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki led to a profound reevaluation of warfare and the responsibilities of science and technology. The bombings spurred global efforts for nuclear disarmament and control, though the threat of nuclear weapons continues to loom large in international relations. Survivors, known as hibakusha, have become powerful advocates for peace and disarmament, sharing their stories to ensure that the horrors of nuclear warfare are never forgotten. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki stand as a somber reminder of the potential destructiveness of human innovation and the ethical dilemmas posed by the advancement of technology. They symbolize a moment in history when humanity faced the dark reality of its capacity for annihilation and the urgent need for restraint, reflection, and a commitment to peace. Number 10. The reign of Vlad the Impaler. Vlad III, known as Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Dracula, ruled as the Prince of Wallachia 3 times during the mid-15th century. His reign is infamously associated with extreme brutality, especially his penchant for impaling his enemies. A staunch defender of Wallachia against Ottoman expansion, Vlad earned his nickname by impaling thousands of Ottoman soldiers and other enemies on long, sharp stakes. This grisly method of execution was both a tactical strategy and a psychological weapon, intending to instill fear and deter invasion. Vlad's cruelty extended beyond the battlefield, as he also brutally punished thieves, liars, and traitors within his domain. He was known to employ torture, mutilation, and execution without hesitation. His reputation has inspired countless legends and myths, mixing historical fact with fantastical tales of his bloodthirstiness. Some even link Vlad the Impaler to the fictional character Count Dracula, created by Bram Stoker. The reign of Vlad the Impaler is a chilling chapter in history, providing a window into the harsh realities of 15th century Eastern European political struggles, where ruthless violence was often wielded as a tool of governance and warfare. Number 11. The Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478 by Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, was a state-run system to enforce religious orthodoxy within the Spanish kingdom. It stands as a symbol of religious intolerance and persecution. Initially aimed at converting or expelling Jews and later Muslims who had outwardly converted to Christianity but were suspected of practicing their faith in secret, the Inquisition expanded its scope to include heretics, witches, and others considered a threat to Catholic doctrine. Methods used by the Inquisition included surveillance, interrogation, torture, and public executions. The infamous auto da fe, public ceremonies during which the sentences were announced, became a spectacle of public humiliation and punishment. The number of people executed by the Spanish Inquisition is debated, with estimates ranging from a few thousand to tens of thousands over its nearly 350-year existence. Its reach extended to Spanish territories in the Americas, leading to the persecution of indigenous beliefs as well. The Spanish Inquisition has been criticized for its excessive zeal, corruption, and abuse of power. It led to a climate of fear and stifled intellectual and cultural development. Historically, the Inquisition reflects the dangers of religious extremism and the state's control over personal beliefs and practices. Its legacy is a sobering reminder of the capacity for institutionalized intolerance and persecution in the pursuit of ideological purity. It continues to serve as a warning against the intrusion of religious or governmental authorities into individual conscience and belief. Number 12. The Bubonic Plague. The Bubonic Plague, also known as the Black Death, was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. It struck Europe in the mid-14th century and is estimated to have killed 75 to 200 million people, wiping out 30% to 60% of Europe's population at the time. The disease was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, transmitted to humans through the bite of infected fleas that lived on black rats. The symptoms were horrifying, including swollen and painful lymph nodes, fever, chills, and gangrene. The plague spread rapidly along trade routes, reaching almost every corner of the continent. Entire villages were decimated, and cities became death traps. The social fabric unraveled as people fled affected areas, abandoning family members and neighbors. The bubonic plague had profound effects on European society. It led to economic disruption, religious upheaval, and a general mistrust among people. The drastic reduction in population also led to labor shortages, contributing to social and economic changes that would shape the modern world. The memory of the plague, with its terrifying symptoms and massive death toll, has lingered in the collective consciousness as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of human society to infectious diseases. Number 14. The enslavement of Africans during the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade is one of the most harrowing chapters in human history, involving the forced capture, transport, and enslavement of millions of Africans by European powers from the 16th to the 19th centuries. The slave trade was driven by the demand for labor in the American colonies, where enslaved Africans were forced to work in brutal conditions, primarily on sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations. The journey to the Americas, known as the Middle Passage, was a nightmare of inhumanity, with captives packed into overcrowded ships, suffering from malnutrition, disease, and physical abuse. It is estimated that approximately 12 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic, with around 1.8 million dying during the journey. The impact on African societies was profound, leading to social disruption, economic exploitation, and a lasting legacy of racial inequality. The enslavement of Africans during the transatlantic slave trade has left deep scars that continue to affect relations between Africa and the West and the status of people of African descent worldwide. It stands as a stark example of the human capacity for cruelty, exploitation, and dehumanization in the pursuit of economic gain. The abolition of the slave trade and slavery itself was a complex and protracted struggle, involving the efforts of enslaved people themselves, as well as abolitionists and lawmakers. The legacy of slavery continues to be a subject of reflection, debate, and a call for ongoing efforts towards social justice and reconciliation. Number 15. The Khmer Rouge's genocide in Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge's reign of terror in Cambodia from 1975 to 1979 stands as one of the most brutal genocides in modern history. Led by Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge sought to create a purely agrarian communist society by eradicating all perceived enemies and influences of the past. The regime's radical policies led to the forced evacuation of cities, with millions of people sent to labor camps in the countryside. Intellectuals, professionals, and anyone associated with the former government or foreign powers were systematically targeted for execution. Even minor infractions, such as wearing glasses or speaking a foreign language, could result in death. Families were torn apart, and traditional Cambodian culture was suppressed. Religion, education, and personal property were abolished in a ruthless attempt to create a classless society. The conditions in the labor camps were horrific, with forced labor, inadequate food, poor sanitation, and rampant disease. Torture and execution were commonplace. The infamous S-21 prison in Phnom Penh, where over 14,000 prisoners were tortured and killed, has become a symbol of the regime's inhumanity. It is estimated that approximately 1.7 to 2 million people, or about a quarter of Cambodia's population, died as a result of the Khmer Rouge's policies. The deaths were due to execution, forced labor, starvation, and disease. The regime was eventually overthrown by Vietnamese forces in 1979, but the scars left by the Khmer Rouge continue to affect Cambodia to this day. The trials of some of the surviving Khmer Rouge leaders have been fraught with controversy and delays, reflecting the complexity of seeking justice and reconciliation.